You're now listening to Vices and Vultures, a podcast on cultures. What's going on, everybody? This is A2, and on Fridays we'll feature regular guests who will share the cultures that they're passionate about. I will let our second guest now introduce himself and the conversation we are going to get into.
Hey, this is Bill, and I'm a coffee enthusiast. You're about to listen to part one of a podcast all about becoming a home barista. Enjoy. For me, what's fascinating about coffee when I really started getting into it is that coffee is a fruit and it should be sweet. Yeah. And if it's done right, roasted well and grown right and all these other things that go into it, it should be sweet. You know, it is a seed from a fruit. And when you kind of lift the veil on that and you taste coffee as it's intended, you realize putting milk in it isn't good. Adding sugar isn't necessary because you actually taste the fruit. And case in point, however this coffee is processed, I taste banana. I taste a berry. They list a blackberry as a taste note. I don't really have a great familiarity with how blackberry tastes, so I'm going to trust that they think it's blackberry. If that's in your coffee, wherever it's from, would you ever pour milk into this? Would you feel the need to add sugar to this? I don't think so. And I think that's ultimately the difference is I drink my coffee black. Right. I've never had to add anything to it. The only time I've ever put milk in coffee was probably high school, because I was drinking terrible diner coffee, which was awful. But at that point, specialty coffee and pour overs and the kinds of shops that we have available on a regular basis now did not exist.
Bill and I have met through mutual friends in the specialty coffee industry. 8 ounce for $25 is kind of like where this comes from. This is not something that you hear of from a more mainstream or even like from a local thing, unless it's specialty based. These are the people that we're associated with, and this is where we get the terminology taste notes, talking about the different styles of roasting, which is what we want to discuss as this column goes on. We understand that coffee is a very big staple, regardless of how you drink it in Western culture in particular. So we want to honor that and just kind of give more on what it is, because there's so much to be desired. I'm looking at this box right now, and, you know, there's just a lot of history to it. It's a fruit. It's grown in a different country. And as you said, why would I put milk in that if there's just so much to be desired from that? What do we got here, Bill?
We have a very delicious Colombia coffee roasted by Augie's, which is a roastery based in Texas. What is special about this coffee is it's from a farm called La Palma y El Tucán, and they are a very, very well-known farm in Colombia that uses a lot of different methods for growing coffee, lots of different styles, lots of different ways to process it. And this particular coffee is one really amazing, really flavorful coffee. It's the first time I've ever actually tasted banana in a coffee, which is insane. Right. Because normally when you talk about the taste of fruit in a coffee, it's berry related, cherry, raspberry, strawberry. This is the first time I've ever tasted legitimately like banana is in this coffee, which is pretty wild.
Right. That is kind of crazy. And for anybody that's listening, when they hear about coffee, they don't correlate it with bananas. And you talked about berry taste and things of that nature. So let's talk a little bit about what would be called taste notes, correct?
Taste notes, yeah. It's a interesting thing that I think sometimes gets lost for people who maybe aren't as deep divers, such as myself, into coffee, because it can get really specific. And sometimes when things get really specific, it can be a turnoff. One of the dangers of using taste notes for me is that if I say something that you don't like, let's say I say it has a tobacco taste and you hate tobacco, you're immediately going to be turned off. Right. So it's dangerous. I've always believed that the taste note should be less specific and more generalized, using words like fruit instead of saying specifically banana. Because if you don't like bananas, you're out on this coffee.
Right. Some people may or may not have stopped listening after this. Hopefully you guys stuck around for the explanation. But yeah, I just wanted to go over that because I feel like it's important.
Yeah, I think it is important because I think the taste notes, what is important about them is that it can give you the general idea of what you're going to sip on. And that is a really big difference between an average coffee drinker and somebody as myself, is that I kind of want to know the taste notes because I want to know that it's going to be a fruit forward kind of tea-like light coffee.
Right.
Because that's what I like to drink. That's not necessarily to say it's the correct way to drink coffee. That I feel like that's also dangerous terminology, but taste notes kind of give you what you're going to have. So if it leads off with maybe chocolate or something in that range, it's probably going to be a heavier bodied coffee. And that coffee might apply itself really well to adding milk, to adding other things if you use half and half or alternative milks or whatever. I do not. So for me, I always want the taste notes to lead with fruit because then I know it's going to be a sweeter coffee and I don't need to worry about any kind of additives or whatnot. I think that's, for me, where it's important about taste notes. And I've always thought that if they simplify the taste notes, it would do more for more people.
Right. So who generates these taste notes?
That's a good question. I think some has to come from the farm, I would hope, because they're the ones growing it and they know the situation in which they're growing. I'm assuming Colombia, where this coffee's grown, I wouldn't be surprised if bananas are also grown on the same farm.
Gotcha.
And maybe the distance between where the bananas are growing and where the coffee is growing might be really close, hence why you get some of that flavor. It could also just be in the process or whatever, but that would be my assumption. And I'm sure roasters also, when you create a roast profile for coffee, you're also determining some of those taste notes. If you're roasting medium or dark, has nothing to do with the farm anymore. Then it becomes what the roaster's using.
Gotcha.
The roaster can bring out notes through the roaster that are completely different than maybe what the farm intended. That's why roasting is not such a straightforward, easy thing. You really need people that are capable of taking a coffee and getting the best out of what the farm's done. You're just amplifying it. You're completing what is a largely done process already.
Got you.
So, this coffee is roasted probably a little closer to medium than light, but it needed it because the flavors that are in it, I think if it was too light, it would be a very strange coffee. I felt like it needed the extra body in it. And I think that's why it's roasted closer to medium.
Got you. So for the, I'm almost done with this and it's fantastic, but for the noob, for the inexperienced, for the people who are like, what did they just talked about for the past 5 minutes? Let's dig a little deeper into what taste notes are and unpack what it just tastes like for an individual like myself. Like what am I supposed to be? Am I just supposed to be tasting coffees and just like trying to like decipher if it's like fruit now? And then, there's also the additives element because you did mention that some deserve it, some don't, and then it's also preference related.
Yeah, I think the last part is the single most important thing, regardless of what level of a coffee drinker you are. If you're a guy like me who is trying to find unique roasters and different coffees and varietals, who really gets deep into what coffee is, it's still about preference.
Right.
And if you're just a guy who likes to stop at 7-Eleven in the morning and get, a giant coffee and put half and half and a bunch of sugar in, that's okay too. There's no wrong way to drink coffee. The difference is, for me anyways, is that coffee is not very good on its own. The reason you're adding milk and sugar isn't because you want to add milk and sugar. It's because you have to. That coffee is roasted, generally speaking, very dark. It's usually very cheap coffee. There's a reason why you can get, a 16-ounce cup for under $2, whereas this box that we're drinking right now is 8 ounces and costs $25.
Numbers.
Yeah, and that's math, but it's an important math.
Yeah.
There is a reason why things are priced the way they are, and So there's no real wrong way. It's really about preference. And if you enjoy that, if you enjoy coffee that way, where you're stopping at your local 7-Eleven, Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, maybe a bagel shop if you're on Long Island, because there's one every mile or so, you're not going to really worry about taste notes. You're drinking coffee for caffeine. You're drinking it as a warm beverage. You want it to be flavorful. If it's not flavorful, you're adding some kind of hazelnut creamer or some shot of vanilla.
Something sugary.
You're actually adding the taste to the coffee, which should tell you everything you need to know about taste notes. If you have to add flavor to coffee, then you're not drinking probably very flavorful coffee in general.
Let's talk about how you made this.
Yeah, so this is my normal morning ritual, pretty daily. I like to use a Hario V60, which is a pour-over dripper. It's a slower method of brewing coffee, which is the first, really ultimately the first device that I ever learned to make a pour-over on. It's a slow approach to coffee. It's manual brewing, using a gooseneck kettle and applying water to freshly ground coffee, and takes 3 to 4 minutes, and it's fantastic. It brings out all the things that I love about coffee, the sweetness and the cleanness and the crispness of the coffee, I think, as is intended. And if you look at this packaging, maybe we could put a picture somewhere. Actually, on the back of the box, it says, "Drink this slowly." I brew it slowly. I drink it slowly. This is something that's to be savored. It's very similar in approach to wine. If you drink really nice wine, there's a whole process of taking the cork out, letting it breathe, putting it in your cup, smelling it. The same approach applies to coffee. As you're making a pour over, you're letting it bloom. You're smelling the bloom. You're taking a process, you're letting it breathe when it's in your decanter, you're stirring it, you're pouring it into the mug, you're allowing it to sit for a minute. It's a very similar approach, and it's an art form in some ways, and it's fantastic. It really is. And I think the more people were able to try coffee brewed this way, the better their appreciation would be for what the actual nuances and flavors are in coffee straight.
Right.
And you go to a place like Flux in Farmingdale, where you can only get coffee as either a pour over or through espresso. People probably go in there all the time looking just to get a cup of coffee. And they're used to there being a giant vat, a batch brew behind the counter, and you get a cup and you go put milk in it. And I've been there at times where I've seen people get a pour over and they're blown away because they're not used to seeing that process on a regular basis. And those guys, they do it perfectly, and it's wonderful. And I've seen people, I don't even need to put milk in this. Say it straight to the barista, because it's such a different taste, and it's a wonderful taste. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is what I do in the morning. And the more you see it at shops, I think the easier it is to bridge that gap.
Right. Definitely. And I'm with you as far as shouting out Flux, because, as you said, it's not a traditional thing to see. But what's refreshing is that the power of just simply saying, let me just expose you to something different just this once. And that's what this whole thing is about. So your setup as far as putting together this pour over, there are other ways to brew at home. Have you tried other ways? Is this the method that I think this is the method that you prefer now, but have you tried other ways? Do you know about the other methods that people typically use that you can speak on?
Pour over coffee is a very broad term, because within that there are a lot of different devices and methods to use. Hario V60 is my preferred because I've used it for the longest duration of time. So for me, it's the easiest device to use. I don't really need to look up recipes. I don't need to research what I'm doing. It's secondhand at this point. It is not the easiest device. A V60 has one large hole at the bottom. So your pouring has to be pretty precise, because if you pour too aggressively, your water shoots straight through and you're making a terrible cup of coffee. There are other devices like Kalita 185 or 155, which you'll find at Flux. That is the method that they use, which is a flat bottom, has 3 small holes, and it's much easier to not mess up. That's basically what that device is made for. It brews a different kind of cup, brings out different elements to your coffee, but those are just 2 of many. I mean, you've got an AeroPress, which is a whole pump immersion device. You've got siphons. You've got there are a lot of different devices, and really it comes down to, again, the same thing. It's about preference and what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and it's also I'm assuming money is involved in that as well, because with these different apparatus, there's expenses. So what you have compared to what somebody would typically invest in as far as home barista, home brewing, like how does that stack up?
The most important part about home brewing, and this is something that anybody will tell you that's in coffee, is that you need a good grinder. Preferably some kind of burr grinder, which is just the style of grinding. You need a good grinder. It doesn't have to be a $600 grinder. The grinder that's sitting on my countertop right now is an $80 grinder. So you can find affordable options that will do the job. Will it be as good as the stuff you'll see in shops? Not necessarily, but it will absolutely be good enough for home barista. And I think that's something that's really important to stress, is that it can be daunting when you see all this equipment and think that you're going to have to spend a lot of money, but you need a good grinder, you need a gooseneck kettle. Those 2 things you can probably get for under $200. Some places will say you need this grinder, which costs $300. You need this kettle, which costs another $200. That's not true. And I think that's something that needs to be lifted off of specialty coffee, is that you need good gear, but you don't need the most expensive gear, especially at home. When you're making a cup of coffee, you're throwing in a thermos, jumping in your car to go to work. You don't need to have, a $900 grinder, some diamond tip burr or something. It's ridiculous. That's something I've really stressed. So, and then, a pour over device is $20. Filters, another $10. A decanter, something to brew the coffee into. You can actually brew right into mugs, which I usually do.
Save your fast food money.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, a home setup can be for, I would say $300.
Hey.
Which will get you everything you need and get you set up. And that number could be significantly lower depending on how thorough you want to be about this. But having a grinder is really important. You want to grind your coffee fresh. That's your first step. Really get a nice grinder. Before you get into the really complicated stuff about the water you're using and the coffee you're buying and all that stuff, just get yourself set up with a grinder, a kettle, and a device.
Cool. I'm excited because we're actually doing a part 2 to this episode where we're going to meet with another home barista and discuss more about what he uses and everything else to follow up this discussion. So is there anything else that you want to close with as far as what we discussed today? Final tips?
2. 1, don't ever feel intimidated in a coffee shop. Ask any questions you want. That's what the baristas are there for. That's what people like me are there for, even if I'm just a customer. I love when people ask me questions because the more you ask, the easier it gets.
Right.
That's really important. And 2, just be happy. Be happy with what you're doing. Whatever you're drinking, just be happy about it.
Don't feel guilty about what you're drinking right now. No. For those who are listening.
Yeah, Dunkin' Donuts isn't terrible. It's not as good as the stuff I drink, but it's not terrible. And if it gets you through your day, that's all that matters.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Vices and Vultures and considering being a supporter of this project. Even leaving a review on your preferred podcast platform goes a long way for us. There is more information about this episode, as well as who we are, in the show notes. This includes all of our social media links so you can see us and not just hear us. Vices and Vultures is brought to you by Aesthetic and is based in the great state of New York. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast for more episodes and tune in next time to Vices and Vultures.